Kraka Drak is the home of the Norse Dwarfs. These are an offshoot of the dawi who've lived in isolation of the chaotic north for thousands of years and yet resisted the allure of demons to this day. They share their Norscan neighbours' aggression and near barbarism combined with the classical dawi technological superiority to make for one powerful faction. But how do they work in game? Let's take a look and find out. This video is sponsored by Instant Gaming, but more on that later. Now to be honest, this mod mainly focused on the battle side of things. Whilst the faction does have their own campaign, it is very similar to the other dwarves. They have all of the same base mechanics like Ages of Reckoning, Grudges, and everything works more or less the same. They do come with their own unique set of buildings which moves around their recruitment as well as adding entirely new units. They also have a unique tech tree that's a lot smaller than vanilla factions but covers most of the same bases of military and infrastructure. They have a few techs along the right side that gear their faction totally towards war at the cost of other areas of the game. These are really something to be picked up later on once you're a little bit more in control, as they could really kneecap a campaign if you grab them too early. Still, they're a cool addition and I like the idea of a tech actually changing the game instead of being an incremental upgrade. As for their faction playstyle, it is pretty basic with the main differences being an even stronger stance against corruption and a focus on getting Thanes in combat. The faction leader, Kraka, allows you to make use of the new top-of-the-line melee infantry a lot cheaper and can withstand the effects of his chaotic surroundings a lot easier. Moving over to the roster, but just before that, as I said, this video is sponsored by Instant Gaming. If you're watching this video, chances are you like playing games, but I reckon you also hate paying so much for them. These days, prices have risen so high that keeping up to date with the latest releases is borderline impossible unless your dad happens to be Jeff Bezos. But with Instant Gaming, you can take the edge off, both literally and metaphorically. They have all the latest and greatest releases from Space Marine 2 for 26% off to the new Void Shadows DLC for Rogue Trader for 43% off. Both of these are key to Steam, but if you like using other storefronts like Epic or Good Old Games, they also have you covered. Even if you're not on PC, they sell keys for PlayStation, Xbox, and even the Switch, so no matter what games you're playing or where you're playing them, you should be using Instant Gaming to make sure you're getting the best deal. And I know that some of these key sites can seem real sketchy, but Instant Gaming not only provides you with keys within moments of purchase, they also have 24/7 customer service and a 4.7 out of 5 with over 700,000 reviews on Trustpilot. I got myself 3 months of Game Pass for 35% off, and I've had no issues, so I can't recommend them enough. Plus, anyone who buys anything using my link is automatically entered into a giveaway for anything on the entire store. Plus, if you do use the link, it also supports the channel and helps make videos like this possible, so that's pretty cool, as well as the chance to get free games. So if you'd like to get yourself some cheap games, then use the link below to start gaming instantly. They're going to cut ties with me, I just know it. A huge thank you to Instant Gaming for partnering with the channel and making videos like this possible. Now, onto the roster. First up, we have the faction leader, Kraka. He's pretty much an even tankier Bellingar, dropping some attack and damage for more defense. He probably takes the spot for the toughest nut to crack in the Dwarfs roster, but other than that, is pretty basic in his base form. He will serve as a great frontlines lord to provide long-lasting leadership, but he won't exactly carry any battles for you. For his mounts, he has a Rune Draken, which makes him into a Lord version of this unit, which I'll come back to later. We're also getting a new generic Lord, the Ward Lord. These are another very tanky Lord with a massive amount of defense alongside their non-armor piercing damage. They're also another runic magic Lord, but instead of the normal runes, they have a couple of unique ones. They can deal some magical fire damage in a tear shape and reduce the leadership and vision of nearby enemies. They're nothing overpowered, but they add another Lord choice to the roster and bring several auras to keep up the value even when they're not casting. We have a new legendary hero, Ogre Three Fingers, and this guy is a true all-round battler. He's a highly damaging melee combatant with a good chunk of attack and armor piercing damage. He has some limited magical range damage, and has a few runic spells he can use for even more value, including a few unique options. There's not really a bad way to use him aside from dueling other high damage characters, as his defense isn't exactly the best. Moving over to the melee infantry, we have a couple of units from Norsca, the Kjolling Warriors and the Kjolling Bondsmen. These are essentially Marauders from Norsca and slightly upgraded Spearmen Marauders from Norsca. The Braves are a kind of halfway point between regular Dwarfs and Slayers. They lack a lot of armor or defense, but make up for it with increased speed, attack, and that bonus versus infantry. Add on their rage and the Tally for Grimnir, and the longer they manage to survive in combat, the more deadly they become. As long as they start out against something that won't put up much of a fight, they can get on a decent roll, but are for sure a little bit high risk. Ogre's blades are similar to the hero they're named after, as they dodge the dwarven convention of focusing on defense in exchange for a little more reckless offense. They're lacking any armor piercing, so are only really useful at taking on chaff. To their credit, once they get in a roll with their Berserk, they can be pretty deadly alongside their regen from the Master Rune, but they are still a little bit reckless for a full front line. Stormbeards are a little more in line with what you'd expect from the Dwarves. They still aren't the most defensive focused, but they're no longer completely reckless. Their stat card is honestly pretty standard, and they'd work fine as a normal front lines, but that's not really how you're supposed to use them. Instead, you should use their Vanguard deployment to place them somewhere sneaky, and use that Ogre charge to crush enemies on impact. If they ever get there. With 30 speed, I've got no idea how you're supposed to pull this off, but I respect the ambition. Ward bearers really come back to the dwarf tradition with hardly any focus on attack and a massive amount of defense. These are an absurdly tanky melee infantry with very high defense armor, silver shield, charge resistance and reflection, as well as physical and magical resistance. Basically anything that comes their way will hardly touch them, so make sure they have some high damage support to make the most of them being a literal brick wall. Lastly, Huskars. These are essentially souped up Ogre's blades with stat improvements across the board, making them truly deadly on the front lines. They still have okay defense, but their attack and damage are massively improved, making them a terror to anything they come up against. Their limited ammo ranged weapons let them soften up enemies before they make impact, and their rage makes them deadlier the longer they're battling. They are a little bit high risk for endgame dwarf melee infantry, but they put in the work to make them worth trying. For the ranged infantry, we have the spike gunners, and these are essentially miners with guns. They have a very short range, low ammo, but some respectable armor piercing damage for their stage of the game. The problem is they have the same slow speed and pitiful melee stats as miners, so if they need to get an angle, they're completely screwed. If the enemy army has monsters, they're set, otherwise it's going to be a struggle to keep them alive, let alone get any value. Pathgrinders are another short-range unit, only this time they have non-armor piercing explosive missiles designed to reduce enemy stats to 8 front lines instead of rack up all the kills. That said, in practice they actually do some really great damage even against high armor, so don't be afraid to target clumps of whatever you want to bring the value. They also have a decent firing arc, so as long as they're not battling uphill, they should be able to get shots off without too many issues. Trolls at Seers shoot quite similarly to the Poison Wind Globades from the Skaven, but with a strong focus on anti-large. Their damage isn't the highest otherwise and will struggle against armor, even with some mild explosive power. That said, Poison is effective versus anything, so if you have no choice, then by all means, target the biggest clump you can. Once they're out of ammo, they're okay at support melee with more poison and high damage, but they won't be the easiest to keep alive, so only go to this as a last resort. And lastly, Frost Drakes. These work similarly to the Iron Drake torpedoes as far as their firing arc, but their targeting is a lot different. With their magical and armor piercing damage, they're great against clumps of enemy front lines. Add on their runic frost, which reduces the speed, damage, and weirdly fire resist of the targets, and they not only deal a good chunk of damage themselves, but also allow other units in your army to deal even more. For the cavalry, they gain the Kjorling Horseman, which is just the same as the Throwing Axe Marauder Horseman from Norscan. And lastly, for the one and only war machine, the Rune Draken. This is a magical chariot with a bunch of bells and whistles. On a basic level, as a chariot, it wants to be charging in and out of enemies to rack up kills in melee. Don't let it get bogged down for too long, as that large hitbox and low defense can spell a quick doom against anything with high damage. Alongside this, it has some powerful ranged damages it throws out all the time it's charging to rack up a little more value. It has decent mass for a chariot, but the slow speed does make it easy to bog down with heavier infantry, so use a lot of caution when running it around. And lastly, the Regiments of Renown. We have the Raiders of the Lost Urk, they're a Rangers unit, the Stone Guard, who are Ward Bearers, the Dumb Berserkers, who are Braves, the Crimson Bane, who are Stormbeards, the True Sons of Ulrich, who are Kjorling Champions, Drake Guard, who are Huskals, the Thunderbows, who are Pathgrinders, and the Carrions, who are Norscan Horsemasters. Now to close out with a few thoughts about this mod. So the campaign side of this mod is pretty minimal. You get a new starting location, buildings, and tech tree, but they don't really change how the faction plays all that much. Even the starting location isn't all that unique, since Malachi is basically in the same spot. The new units are really the attraction here, and thankfully they don't disappoint. The more limited roster encourages you to use their unique troops and change your playstyle to make the most of them. I wouldn't say these new units are anything crazy I would be tempted to use in a regular dwarf army, but it works for this faction and makes your battles and army building feel different. The ranged units in particular are a lot of fun, as they often are for the dawi. They work differently to most other dwarf ranged units and have fun specialities, so you can focus on different targets to get a lot of value. The addition of Norscan units is nice for a bit of speed and variety, but with the exception of Horsemen, I probably wouldn't use them unless I was running low on gold, since dwarf front lines are just unparalleled. Still, if you want a slightly tweaked dwarf experience that forces you to change from the regular armies you'll probably build in every other game, this mod does a great job at providing just that. And that's all I have on this Kraka Drak mod for Warhammer 3. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the mod, as well as any you'd like me to check out. Don't forget to check out Instant Gaming at the link below to get yourself some cheap games. Like, subscribe, become a member to see yourself in the credits, and if you want more Warhammer 3 videos, then why not check out this one on the Legions of Nagash.